Ilkeston, Derbyshire, a small English town nestled in the Airwash Valley, where terraced houses line the hillsides and everybody seems to know everybody else. It is the kind of place where neighbors still wave from their front gardens and children play in the parks until the streetlights flicker on. It was here, in this unassuming corner of the East Midlands, that 31-year-old Sarah Henshaw had built her life, a life centered entirely around two little girls she loved more than anything in the world. To understand what happened to Sarah Henshaw, we need to go back to the beginning. The eldest of 6 siblings, Sarah grew up in a busy, boisterous household where she took on responsibilities from an early age. She was the one who helped with the younger children, the one who kept things together, the one everyone turned to. That sense of duty, that instinct to care for others before herself, followed her into adulthood. She dedicated herself to caring for the elderly in Ilkeston, a job that perfectly reflected her compassion, her patience, and her deep, abiding need to help those around her. Her sister Megan described it best. She made friends everywhere she went, she said, a sad smile crossing her face. If she saw someone struggling, she would help no matter what. She would open her home and her heart to anyone that was willing. She'd go to the shop and someone wouldn't be able to pay for the nappies or some food, and she'd pay for them. She'd help you, and she'd expect nothing back. The amount of times I called her and said, "I've got no food in, come and raid my freezer." She was just always giving, and that's why so many people loved her. At 19, Sarah welcomed her first child, stepping into motherhood on her own, as a single mum. She relied on her mother and stepfather for support, and they were thrilled. Oh, so excited she was, her mother recalled fondly. We went out buying everything. By all accounts, Sarah was a natural, bubbly and fun, brilliant with her daughter, willing to do anything for her child. She threw herself into the role with the same wholehearted enthusiasm she brought to everything in her life. Her stepfather became a pillar in her world, a relationship that spoke volumes about Sarah's capacity to love. At first, we're just friends, he remembered. Then, when it comes to helping her with things, she started seeing me as a dad and starts calling me Pops or Dad. They've got no kids of me, and for someone to take me on as the dad and see me as a dad that got me, it was a family built on love and loyalty, the kind of foundation that Sarah needed, and the kind that someone else would soon try very hard to destroy. After years of managing life as a single mother with grace and resilience, Sarah met Darren Hall, a 27-year-old carpet fitter who lived locally. She mentioned him to her family a few times casually at first before anyone realized it was becoming serious. Her family's first impressions were telling. "I didn't know it was serious until I went up to see her, and that's when I first met him," one relative recalled. "She can't really say anything when you first meet someone, but as I got to know him, I just thought there's something not right about him. He wasn't really chatty or bubbly like me and Sarah. Sarah always goes for the loud, bubbly jokers like she was. From the outset, something about Darren Hall didn't fit." Megan's reaction was more visceral, more immediate. "I remember the first time I met him," she said, "and he walked into my mom's front room with Sarah, and he just made me feel sick. He made my skin crawl. No one liked him. Not a person, not the cats, not the dogs, not even the hamsters. That should have really been big red flag number 1. But Sarah was smitten. She loved him," a family member acknowledged. "It was one of them fell in love with him, so I just left her to do it." And as experts in domestic abuse would later explain, there was a calculated reason Sarah fell so hard, so fast. Darren Hall had a playbook, one shared by narcissistic abusers the world over. Like with all narcissistic abusers, they start off as Prince Charming. "Who's gonna save her?" a family member observed. She was a single mom, and he came in and was like, "I'll look after you. I'll do you good." And it really didn't take long for those rose-colored glasses to switch. A behavioral analyst who studied the case offered a deeper insight into the dynamic at play. Darren will have realized that he had hit the jackpot when he managed to secure a relationship with someone as vivacious, as intelligent, as attractive as Sarah, they explained. This sense of imbalance actually set up the relationship so he was always going to be feeling defensive, because he felt that he was punching above his weight. That insecurity, that gnawing sense of not being good enough, would come to define and ultimately destroy everything. The warning signs began slowly, almost imperceptibly. Sulky comments about Sarah's appearance or behavior, possessiveness masquerading as devotion. "I thought they got on at first," a relative recalled, "but then she confided in me. 'Oh, he's saying this, he's saying that.' Just sulky comments." And I said, "You need to tell him straight. You don't need to be hearing horrible things about yourself." Others noticed a different quality in Darren, a quiet arrogance. "They definitely did think he was better than everyone else," the same relative added. Sarah's family watched as Darren began isolating her, methodically severing the bonds that kept her strong. Her mother noticed it acutely. "Quite often, I'd go and look after her cats and clean the house for her," she said, "and Darren had an issue with that. He didn't like that I had a key. He didn't like that I could just see Sarah when I wanted. He was used to having her on a short leash, and from then on, we didn't see much of Sarah."
From then on, we didn't see much of Sarah.
Sarah herself had found a way to interpret the possessiveness. The analyst identified this coping mechanism. Sarah was able to interpret the possessiveness and the jealousy as an indication of his passion for her, they noted. And that's not an entirely invalid interpretation. The distinction comes where you get some indication of a hatred of the partner or the partner's family alongside the passion. That's where it becomes a warning sign. And Darren Hall was sending warning signs that practically screamed. The analyst described the isolation tactic with clinical precision. Darren has a real cunning instinct. He knows that Sarah's family are her stronghold. He knows that if he wants to have Sarah to himself, then he has to isolate her from all that emotional support that she clearly gets from her family. It was textbook coercive control. Remove the support network, and the victim has nowhere left to turn. Those who spent time around the couple described an atmosphere of unpredictability that kept everyone on edge. You never sort of knew where you stood with him, one family member recalled. One minute he's smiling and laughing with you. The next minute, it's like someone's really tweaked a nerve in him, and you've got no idea what it is. And he won't say anything, he'll just give you the looks. That was where I was sort of like, nah, don't want to be around that, thanks. Despite the growing unease, Sarah moved in with Darren. Her mother, sensing danger in a way only a parent can, took action of her own. She moved closer so she could keep an eye on her daughter. I thought, I'm going to move. I'm going to get close, she said. It was then that Sarah finally began to confide in her, revealing the tangled emotions that made walking away feel impossible. She kept coming to me, her mother recalled, and just saying, I've had enough, but I want to be with him. I love him, and I've got a baby on the way. What Sarah hadn't yet told anyone was that Darren had already crossed the line into physical violence. Unaware at this stage that Sarah was pregnant, he had attacked her. He pushed her or did something to her stomach, her mother said, and she'd not felt the baby move. So I said, let's go and get a checkup. She told the hospital that she'd banged into someone or fell. I wasn't happy, but they were living together by then. Mercifully, the baby was unharmed, but Sarah decided to stay, caught in the terrible gravity of a relationship she knew was destroying her but couldn't yet escape. The analyst saw Sarah's resilience as both her greatest strength and her most tragic vulnerability. I think that Sarah was incredibly resilient, psychologically, emotionally, they observed. The sad thing is that that very resilience meant that she tried and tried in this relationship, even when he was treating her so badly. A few months later, Sarah gave birth to a second daughter. Darren Hall was the father, and in the way that new life can sometimes paper over the deepest cracks, things seemed to look up, however briefly. Sarah was thrilled. She was a full-on mum, and she was so proud and excited, a family member remembered. But Darren's true nature revealed itself starkly in how he treated the two girls. When you look at how Darren treated his own biological daughter compared to Sarah's other daughter from a previous relationship, he was two different people, an observer noted. His daughter had everything she wanted. She wanted to go on a day out. The whole family was going on that day out. Whereas when it came to Sarah's other daughter, there was such a clear absence of love. The analyst explained it further. Having a child will have really cemented his sense of having made it in life. The child will have accepted him in a way that he probably isn't used to being accepted by the world. And then came the discovery that would finally begin to open Sarah's eyes. She found out Darren had been having an affair. He didn't get what he needed at home, so he went out elsewhere, a family member said bluntly. That broke Sarah inside. But it also ignited something. Megan watched the transformation. As much as it hurt her and it broke her, it gave her a lot of strength, she said. It lit a fire inside of her that said, no, why am I letting myself be treated like this? Why do I let my girls be around this person? Another relative put it simply, it was like the light switch had finally turned on. Sarah saw it clearly now. This person is capable of a lot worse than what I thought he was, she realized. Because he's hurting me this way, and I'm supposed to be the love of his life. After 3 years, Sarah Henshaw made the most difficult and the most dangerous decision of her life. She walked away from Darren Hall. What followed were the happiest years Sarah had known in a long time. Free from Darren's suffocating control, she began to rediscover who she was, and her family got to rediscover her too. Megan recalled one particular afternoon at Granby Park, a green space woven into the fabric of their childhood, where Sarah used to bring all the kids to play. I remember we'd gone out for a family picnic, and he wasn't there, she said, her voice catching.
We'd gone out for a family picnic, and he wasn't there.
And I've never seen Sarah's eyes sparkle so much. To this day, when I think of Sarah, that's the day I try and remember. That was the last day I can remember, where she was truly happy. For over 3 years, Sarah kept her distance from Darren, resisting his repeated attempts to win her back. She set boundaries, she built routines, she focused on her girls, but cutting Darren out entirely proved impossible. They shared a daughter, and that bond gave him a permanent route back into her life. The fact that they had a little girl together means he always had a way to get his claws back into her, a family member explained. There was always a reason to talk to her. There was always a reason to need to see her. Even when they weren't in a relationship, he would use his daughter to create boundaries and restrictions that benefited him and did harm to Sarah. Megan treasured those years of freedom. She loved her family, and the best years of her life were when he didn't have control over that, she said. When she could just love us freely, share her children with us, share memories with us. That's what I choose to remember, because that's when he wasn't there to cloud her judgment. She was just Sarah. But 3 years after walking away, Sarah was hit with devastating news. Her beloved grandfather passed away. It was a loss that cut to the bone. And at her most vulnerable, most grief-stricken moment, Darren Hall saw his opportunity and seized it. As we got back to the wake, he was sat there, a horrified family member recalled, and I said, "Sarah, what's he doing here?" The behavioral analyst described Darren's instinct with chilling precision. She was vulnerable. She was at her weakest moment, and that was when he decided, she's upset, she's vulnerable, she's lost her favorite person in the whole world. This is the right time, the analyst continued. He instinctively knows his moment, because this family that's always been her source of strength, to some degree her source of protection from Darren, is injured, is damaged. Another family member was blunter. What other way can you view a situation like this, other than a predator and their prey? Almost 4 years after leaving him, Sarah took Darren back. They continued living in separate houses, but her family could see the light beginning to fade from Sarah's eyes once more. It really became obvious when he'd got her under his spell again completely, a relative observed, because she'd smile less. She just wasn't as happy. Within weeks, Sarah realized the bitter truth. He hadn't changed at all. She was saying things to me after about a month or two of being back with him, her mother recalled. She's like, "I don't think he has changed. He's done this and done that, bought me this and bought me that, but I think it's just to try and keep me here." And the confessions grew darker and more desperate. She'd tell us, "Mom, Megan, it makes my skin crawl," Megan said. "I don't want to be around him. I don't want to be near him, but the girls want to stay there. They want us to be a family." Sarah was caught in an impossible position, trapped between her own safety and her children's desire for a family unit. She was almost sort of thinking, does she let herself get hurt, or does she break her kids' hearts? Megan added. Her mother understood the bind Sarah was in. No matter what happened to her, she was always concentrating on her kids more than anything, she said. As long as they were happy, she wasn't bothered that she was having all this trouble with him. She put up with it for the kids. And there was another dimension to the trap. As a mom, you never want to keep your children away from their parent, and you never want to take away your child's innocence by explaining that their parent is a bad person, Megan reflected. And I think that was his hold. The breaking point came at a concert in Manchester. Sarah and Darren had tickets to see N-Dubs, a night they had both been building toward for months. Before leaving, they arranged for Sarah's 2 daughters to stay with their grandmother. Sarah was excited, and she had reason to believe she might be pregnant with her 3rd child. This will have been a really big night for them, the behavioral analyst noted, something that both of them had really built up their expectations for. They're both very excited this huge concert, surrounded by people. The emotional temperature will have been very high because of that. As the concert drew to a close, the analyst identified a subtle but crucial shift. As the concert finishes, I think inevitably, there might have been some kind of almost sense of disappointment. The high was ending, and for someone like Darren Hall, that emotional come-down was a spark near dry kindling. Back at the hotel, Darren wanted to go out drinking. He wanted to extend the night, to keep the energy alive, and Sarah said no. "We think I might be pregnant," she told him. "I don't want to go out getting bladdered. That's not what I want to do." He didn't like that. What happened next was captured in part on hotel surveillance footage. His hostility comes to the surface, the analyst explained. He starts to blame somebody else for what he's feeling, and that somebody is Sarah. He wanted Sarah to do what he wanted, and when she said no, he beat her up. A family member put it in starker terms. He decided he was going to kick the living hell out of her.
He was going to kick the living hell out of her.
But in the midst of this savage assault, Sarah did something extraordinary. She reached for her phone and sent a text message to her parents, telling them what had happened. It was a desperate act of self-preservation, and it may have saved her life that night, because Darren knew that her family now knew. After the attack, Darren insisted on an immediate 3-hour drive back to Ilkeston in the dead of night. Along the way, Sarah discreetly messaged a friend who rushed to meet her at her mother's house. She ran to her mom's house in the middle of the night, the friend recalled, crying her eyes out, banging on the door because she didn't know what to do. She didn't know if she was going to lose the baby. She didn't want her kids to see her like that. She didn't want to explain to her kids, "Oh, Daddy's hit Mummy." Her mother was in bed, looking after the girls, when Sarah arrived covered in bruises. A friend was already there and immediately told her to take photographs, documentation of the violence that had been inflicted upon her. That night in Manchester changed something fundamental inside Sarah. That attack was so severe that it will have destroyed any residual romantic feelings that Sarah may have still harbored for Darren, the analyst observed. It meant the end of the relationship. Sarah's daughter later confirmed it. That night, it did something to my mum. It made her terrified. Sarah's mother urged her to go to the police, but Sarah, ever focused on her children, chose not to take it further. Instead, she did what she had done before she ended the relationship and set firm, clear boundaries. "You can have the kids on your days, but don't come to my house if it's not your day with the kids." She had done everything right. She had communicated clearly. She had drawn lines in the sand. 6 months had passed since Sarah broke things off with Darren for the final time, and she was coming back to life. Here she is, captured on camera, having a nice meal out with a friend, laughing, relaxed, enjoying an evening that should have been entirely unremarkable. She is recovering. She is rediscovering joy. She is, unmistakably, moving on, and that was precisely the problem. The contrast in the way Sarah and Darren are feeling at this stage couldn't be more stark, the behavioral analyst observed. "We know that Sarah is coming back to life. She's left the relationship in the past. She's getting on with her life." Meanwhile, Darren is submerged in fury and hostility and anger. Darren is becoming aware that she is genuinely moving away, moving on. What should have been an enjoyable evening out was about to become a fight for Sarah's life. Sarah and her friend returned to her home to find Darren Hall already inside. He had let himself in using a key he had never given back. For Sarah, walking through her own front door and finding him standing there must have been a moment of pure dread. Her and her friend were like, "Get out," a family member recounted. "We don't want you here. Please just go." And he just wouldn't. He was adamant that he wouldn't leave. Darren planted himself in Sarah's home and refused to move. "This is my family," he declared. "I'm not going nowhere." Darren, the analyst, believed that seeing Sarah genuinely happy was what tipped him over the edge. I think Darren was shocked when he saw a happy Sarah, a Sarah who, crucially, didn't need him. It will have triggered his sense of complete inadequacy, his sense of rejection. In the hours that followed, the sounds that leaked from Sarah's home told a story of escalating violence. Multiple witnesses heard arguing. One neighbor made out actual voices. Another heard a different, more chilling sound banging. At some point during the night, a concerned neighbor texted Sarah to check if she was all right. A reply came back, "Yes, all okay?" Detectives would later conclude that Sarah didn't send that final message. Her killer did. 3 days passed. Sarah Henshaw was not seen at the school gates. She didn't answer her phone. She didn't respond to messages. Her car sat untouched outside her house, and wherever Sarah went, that car went. Meanwhile, Darren Hall carried on with his life as though absolutely nothing had happened. He did the school run, collecting children from a school where the staff didn't even recognize him. He told anyone who asked that Sarah had needed a break and gone to stay with a friend. He offered an added detail that was designed to shut down further questions. Sarah had mental health difficulties, he claimed, and she'd done this kind of thing before. But the school staff had concerns. They hadn't seen Sarah at pickups or drop-offs in days, and the man now collecting one of the children was a stranger to them. They contacted Sarah's family, and then they called the police. Sarah's mother knew instantly that something was terribly wrong. "I went running up to her house because I was worried," she said. The car was still there. That's a sign wherever she goes, the car goes. The police were changing the locks. They asked who I was because I wasn't allowed in, and I said, "I'm worried. I need to find her. I think he's done something to her. She's hurt somewhere."
I think he's done something to her. She's hurt somewhere.
When police questioned Darren Hall, he stuck to his story. Prosecution barrister Michelle Healy KC later described how investigators saw through it. Even when the police went and spoke to Darren, he still maintained that she had simply left him and gone to a friend's, she explained. However, they became suspicious because there had been no activity for a number of days on her mobile phone or on her bank accounts. People don't simply vanish without a digital trace. Not unless someone makes them vanish. Police arrested Darren Hall and seized his phone, and what they found in the data on that device would reveal exactly what had happened to Sarah Henshaw. Meanwhile, detectives cast a wider net. They spoke to multiple witnesses, slowly piecing together the events of that final night. The picture that emerged was consistent and damning. Arguing had been heard by different people at different times. One witness heard actual voices, the unmistakable sound of a confrontation between two people. Later on, another witness heard something different, the sound of banging. The timeline these witnesses provided was critical. It established that the confrontation inside Sarah's home was not a brief argument that ended in an accidental fall. It was sustained, it was violent, and it continued for some time. Police also examined the home itself. When the police looked at the home, they were able to see that a number of items were missing, the prosecution noted, including an overnight bag and a number of items of clothing. The missing items were part of the fiction Darren was constructing, the story of a woman who had simply decided to leave. But the phone data, the witness statements, and the absence of any digital footprint from Sarah told an entirely different story. Phone records painted a devastating picture of the hours after Sarah disappeared. They showed that on the night she vanished, after the arguing, after the banging, after the terrible silence, Darren Hall left Sarah's 2 young daughters alone in the house. He drove 20 miles through the darkness to a lay-by near Chesterfield. For 9 minutes, his phone's torch lit up the night. Then he drove back. Those 9 minutes would lead police directly to the truth. Officers attended the area where Hall's phone had been pinging, methodically searching the undergrowth near the lay-by. What they found there confirmed every terrible fear that Sarah's family had held since the moment they realized she was gone. They found Sarah. She had been dumped just a few meters from the road, left exposed to the elements in what was a brutally hot summer. The heat had already begun its cruel, irreversible work. Sarah's family would later have to confront details that no family should ever face. I personally will never, ever get the image of maggots and bugs coming out of my sister's face, Megan said, her voice raw and devastated. The fact that she was found with no eyes and her clothing was torn and half-eaten. We were all heartbroken, Sarah's mother said. And then came a moment that shattered what little composure remained. A grandchild walked in and asked, "My mom's never, ever coming back, is she?" The decomposition created a significant forensic challenge for prosecutors. Michelle Healy, KC, explained, "What we suspected was that Sarah had been strangled. Normally, you'd be looking for ligature marks around the neck, or petechiae, which are pinpoint bruises that appear on the eyeballs or on the surface of the skin. And because of the number of days in the decomposition, unfortunately, we didn't have any of that evidence to show exactly how Sarah had died. But the phone data gave investigators another trail to follow. Tracking Darren's movements in the days after Sarah's death, they discovered he had visited a skip, a large waste container he used for his carpet fitting work, and disposed of several items. When police searched that skip, they found Sarah's dressing gown and a dressing gown cord. The implications were devastating. Darren Hall had stripped away the items Sarah had been wearing that night, including what investigators believe may have been the instrument of her death, the dressing gown cord, and then taken other items of her clothing to construct the fiction that she had packed a bag and left of her own accord. It was a chillingly methodical cover-up. He had thought about what investigators would look for. He had anticipated the questions that would be asked, and he had tried to build a narrative that would explain away Sarah's absence without arousing suspicion. The prosecution laid out the calculated nature of his actions. He hatched a plan. He took some of her clothes to a recycling center in order that he could construct a story that Sarah had gone away for a few days. These were not the frantic actions of a panicking man. These were the cold, deliberate movements of someone covering his tracks. When detectives confronted Darren Hall with this evidence, he refused to speak. Just 8 days after Sarah Henshaw's disappearance, police charged him with her murder. Literally, the police came around and said it is a murder investigation. Sarah's mother recalled. It was horrible. Then, despite the weight of evidence, prosecutors knew they faced a formidable challenge. Without definitive pathology to prove the cause of death, there was always the risk that a jury might hesitate. There's always a concern when you've got that question mark hanging over pathology evidence, Michelle Healy acknowledged, and you just don't know what the jury will make of that. 9 years after Sarah Henshaw first dated Darren Hall, he stood trial for her murder. Sarah's family attended every single day. Her mother described the surreal agony of sitting in that courtroom. "I look straight at him every day," she said, "and I thought, you need to know what you've done and what you've done to all my family. I felt like I was in a bubble, like it wasn't real, like somebody's watching it on TV.
Done on what you've done to all my family."
In court, Darren Hall changed his story entirely. Having initially told police that Sarah had simply gone missing, he now admitted that he had watched her die and dumped her body, but he claimed her death was an accident. His defense was that they had been arguing and that Sarah had accidentally fallen down the stairs. He said he had panicked and disposed of the body. He maintained he played no part in her actual death. Megan's response to the accident defense was withering. "The fact that he pled not guilty is just laughable, really," she said. "If you've killed someone by accident, your first thought is, I'm going to call the police or an ambulance to see if they're even still alive. You wouldn't just dump them by the side of the road in their pajamas for insects and animals to get at." The prosecution methodically dismantled the claim of panic. Michelle Healy zeroed in on the timeline, the crucial gap between when neighbors heard the screaming and when the phone data showed Darren moving the body. "It was important for us to show that these weren't the actions of a man who was panicking," she explained. "If anything, he was the complete opposite of that. He had thought very carefully about what he was going to do. The time frame at which we heard the screams and then the body was moved was several hours. That's clear time for him to think about how he was going to dispose of the body and where he was going to dispose of the body." After a 2-week trial, Michelle Healy rose to deliver her closing argument. The final paragraph was a masterpiece of prosecutorial clarity. This was an unlawful assault. It was prolonged. It was not self-defense, and it continued despite the screaming and the pleading. "I do not know exactly how Sarah died. The one man who does has chosen to lie to you, and he couldn't look you in the eye. In the face of what he has done, she died during a violent assault at the hands of a man who was trying to seriously hurt her, and that is why this defendant is guilty of murder." After 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned guilty. When he was found guilty, a family member recalled, the overwhelming reaction was one of relief. Megan and her sister, seated side by side, leapt to their feet. "I jumped up in the air," Megan said, but the relief was soon tempered by the sentence, life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 17 years. "I wasn't so happy on the sentence," Megan admitted, "because obviously life should mean life. It's not my sister, and 17 years just isn't enough. We all have to live with this pain for the rest of our lives, so why shouldn't he live in pain for the rest of his life?" A family member expressed what many in the courtroom were feeling. "I think it's disgusting. I think it's despicable. And I think it shows he is the true lowest of the low." The sentence could not match the magnitude of what had been lost. No sentence could. Before sentencing, Sarah's loved ones were given the chance to address the court. Their words carried the full, unbearable weight of everything that had been taken from them. Sarah's mother spoke first, her gaze fixed on the man who had murdered her daughter. "The fact that he just left her there and continued as if everything was normal, knowing that he's robbed us of any happiness we had left with her, that is the thing I really can't get my head around." Another family member found only one word sufficient: monster. "I'll never forgive him," Sarah's mother continued, her voice breaking under the weight of her grief. "He took part of me away. My heart is broken, and it won't be repaired, because one of my children has been taken away. He deserves to rot."
Away. He deserves to rot.
If anyone's out there suffering, don't go to family. Go to the police. Just don't let this happen again. I had to tell 2 girls that mom's never, ever coming back, and that's the worst thing I've had to do in my life, and I wouldn't like anybody else to go through that, ever. And then there was Megan, standing in Granby Park, the park where Sarah used to bring the children, the park where her eyes had once sparkled on that perfect afternoon, the park that was supposed to be a place of joy. Megan spoke the words that may be the most haunting testimony in this entire case. To everyone sort of locally, "This is Granby Park," she began. "I can't come back here. It's too many memories for me. Sarah would bring us down here, all of us, along with her kids, and we'd all just play together. Being here is difficult," she began, "because when Sarah was here, she was happy and smiley. It was just pure happiness. She got to watch her kids do all the things they enjoyed to do. He stole that light that was inside of her. She had such a bright fire in her, and it's almost like he just kept putting drops of water on it until it went out." She paused, struggling against the tide of grief. "We won't ever get to experience Sarah sitting here and cackling at us for trying to fit in the baby swing or falling off the roundabout. I'll never be able to bring my son here because it will always feel like a piece is missing." In 2023, Darren Hall was convicted of murdering his ex-girlfriend, Sarah Henshaw. She had escaped their abusive relationship for a second time, breaking free from a cycle of control and violence. She had done everything right. She had set boundaries. She had tried, with extraordinary courage, to rebuild her life. But months later, Sarah simply vanished. She was never seen alive again, condemned to her last night out.